Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
My family was deeply religious and every problem had a Bible verse attached to it. My aunt was the unofficial spiritual advisor of our extended family. She'd been this way for as long as I could remember, always ready with a prayer or a piece of scripture when someone was going through a tough time. When I started college, the stress of being away from home, keeping up with demanding coursework, and figuring out my future hit me harder than I expected. I found myself crying in my dorm room most nights, feeling lost and overwhelmed. My roommate suggested I try the campus counseling center, and after weeks of hesitation, I finally made an appointment. Therapy changed my life. My therapist helped me understand that my anxiety wasn't a character flaw or a sign of weak faith. She taught me coping strategies, helped me process my emotions, and gave me tools to navigate life's challenges. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe, but I knew I couldn't tell my family about it. My aunt had made her position on therapy crystal clear during family gatherings. She'd shake her head when someone mentioned seeing a counselor, explaining how people needed to turn to God, not strangers, with their problems. She genuinely believed that therapy was for people who lacked faith. My cousin had tried to open up to her about struggling with depression after his divorce. My aunt's response was swift and cutting. She told him he didn't need to pay some stranger to tell him what was wrong with his life, insisting that prayer was the answer. She explained that talking to anyone other than God about his deepest struggles showed spiritual weakness. My cousin never brought it up again, but I could see how much her words hurt him. From that moment, I decided to keep my therapy sessions to myself. I'd drive to appointments between classes, careful not to mention where I was going when family called. The irony was that my aunt's rigid approach to faith seemed to be causing her own struggles. She was always stressed, constantly worried about everyone else's spiritual well-being, and quick to judge anyone who didn't handle problems the way she thought they should. A few weeks ago, we were all gathered for our monthly family lunch at my grandmother's house. Everyone was catching up, sharing stories from work and school. My aunt seemed quieter than usual, picking at her food instead of dominating the conversation like she normally did. She opened up about feeling spiritually dry lately. She explained that, despite praying, reading her Bible, and going to church, she just felt empty and couldn't explain why. The table went quiet. This was the first time any of us had heard her admit to struggling with anything spiritual. My uncle reached over and squeezed her hand, suggesting she talk to their pastor about it. She told us she had already spoken with Pastor Williams, but he just told her to pray harder and trust God's timing. She admitted that was exactly what she'd been doing, and her frustration was clear. I could see the confusion in her eyes. For someone who always had answers for everyone else, being stuck without a solution was clearly eating at her. Something my therapist had said months earlier came to mind, and before I could stop myself, I spoke up. I told her that sometimes we mistake emotional exhaustion for a spiritual crisis, explaining that they feel the same but need different care. My aunt looked up at me, her eyes widening slightly. The rest of the family nodded thoughtfully, but she seemed particularly struck by what I'd said. She called it really profound, and asked where I'd heard it. I couldn't exactly say it came from my therapist, so I kept it vague, telling her I'd read it somewhere and it had stuck with me. She said it sounded like something from a devotional or Christian book and asked if I could send her the exact quote. She wanted to share it with her Bible study group. I nodded, already planning how I'd handle her request. That evening I texted her the quote, attributing it to a book I'd read without specifying which one. Within days, she was asking for more. Her texts started coming weekly, requesting more gems like the last one because the ladies in Bible study had loved it. I began sending her carefully selected insights from my therapy sessions, always presenting them as things I'd read or heard somewhere. My therapist's wisdom about processing grief, dealing with anxiety, setting boundaries, and managing relationships became my aunt's weekly spiritual revelations. She texted me about how a quote on healing not being linear really spoke to her, asking where I was finding these amazing insights. I told her different places and said I was glad they were helping. The transformation was remarkable. My aunt started becoming more patient with family members who were struggling. She began acknowledging that life was complicated and that simple answers didn't always work. She even admitted to my cousin that maybe she'd been too harsh about his divorce situation. But the most amusing part was watching her share these insights at family gatherings, presenting them as profound spiritual discoveries she'd come across in her studies. She'd quote my therapist word for word, her voice filled with reverence for what she believed was divine wisdom. She shared an incredible insight she'd come across about how sometimes our biggest breakthroughs come from sitting with discomfort instead of trying to fix it immediately. The family would nod appreciatively while I sat there trying not to smile too broadly. That gem came from a session where my therapist helped me work through my anxiety about disappointing people. Last week, my cousin mentioned he was thinking about seeing a counselor again, and I braced myself for my aunt's usual lecture about spiritual weakness. Instead, she told him that sometimes we need different types of support. She explained that she'd been learning how emotional and spiritual health are connected, but they're not the same thing. I nearly choked on my water. She was quoting something my therapist had said about the importance of addressing mental health alongside spiritual practice. She still tells people she doesn't believe in therapy. I graduated from community college with a business degree and spent months applying for office jobs that either never responded or wanted 3 years of experience for entry-level positions. My savings were running dry, rent was due, and my dad kept making comments about me getting serious about my future. When I saw the posting for a sales associate position at a small home goods store downtown, I swallowed my pride and applied. The pay was barely above minimum wage, but it was something. The store was one of those cramped places that sold everything from kitchen gadgets to cheap furniture, squeezed between a nail salon and a sandwich shop. The owner seemed nice enough during my interview, but she mentioned that those day-to-day operations were handled by her assistant manager. That should have been my first red flag. My first week went smoothly. The other employees were friendly, and the work wasn't too complicated. Stock shelves, help customers, clean up, basic retail stuff. But then I met Karen, the assistant manager who basically ran the place while the owner focused on ordering and finances. Karen was probably in her 40s, had been with the company for 8 years, and acted like she owned the place. She had this weird obsession with schedules and procedures that bordered on military precision. On my second Monday, she handed me a laminated sheet with my hourly breakdown. She explained that from 9 to 11, I would stock the kitchen section. From 11 to 1, I would organize the home decor area. 1 to 2 was my lunch break. 2 to 4 meant handling the front register. 4 to 6 was for cleaning and restocking the fitting area. I asked what would happen if I finished early. She told me that I didn't finish early because there was always something to do in my assigned area. She wasn't joking. If I finished stocking the kitchen gadgets at 10:30, she expected me to stand there and dust already clean shelves until 11. If a customer in the furniture section needed help while I was assigned to home decor, she'd swoop in and redirect them herself rather than let me step outside my zone. The other employees had learned to work around her quirks. My co-worker from the afternoon shift, a college student who'd been there for 2 years, warned me during my first week. He told me to do exactly what was on my schedule and nothing else, saying it was easier that way. I asked what would happen if someone needed help or there was an emergency. He said to let Karen handle it because she liked being in control of everything anyway. I tried to follow his advice, but it went against every instinct I had. My parents raised me to help people when I could, and standing around doing nothing while others struggled felt wrong. Plus, I genuinely wanted to do a good job and maybe get promoted eventually. The breaking point came on a busy Thursday in my third week. I've been assigned to the small kitchen section from 9 to 11, which usually took me about an hour and a half to fully stock and organize. By 10:15, I had everything perfectly arranged. Shelves were full, and the area looked spotless. I was about to start my usual routine of pretending to dust clean surfaces when I heard a crash from the back storage room. One of the delivery guys had dropped a box of ceramic dishes, and my co-worker was trying to clean up the mess while also dealing with a new shipment of heavy furniture pieces. The delivery guy had already left, and my co-worker was clearly overwhelmed. He was sweating trying to sweep up broken ceramic while also attempting to move a dining table that was way too heavy for one person. I offered to help him with the table. He gratefully accepted, saying the thing weighed a ton and was blocking the whole walkway. We were just lifting the table when Karen appeared, like she had some kind of radar for policy violations. She demanded to know what I was doing, pointing out that helping with deliveries wasn't my scheduled task. I explained that I had finished my section early and saw he needed help with the delivery. I said it would just take a minute. She said it didn't matter. I was assigned to the kitchen section until 11, so I needed to go back to my area. I pointed out that I was completely done with everything there. The shelves were stocked, organized, and clean. She told me to find something else to do in that section. Polish the displays, rearrange items, check expiration dates. My schedule said kitchen section until 11, so that's where I needed to be. I looked at my co-worker, who was still struggling with the table and shooting me an apologetic look. This was insane. There was clearly work that needed to be done. I was available to help, and she was stopping me because of an arbitrary schedule. I asked if she'd rather have me stand around doing busy work while he struggled with something that actually needed to be done. She said she'd rather have me follow the schedule exactly like I was supposed to. They had systems in place for a reason. Fine. If she wanted me to follow the schedule exactly, then that's exactly what I'd do. I went back to the kitchen section and just stood there. The shelves were perfect. Every item was properly placed facing forward with correct pricing. There was literally nothing left to do, but according to Karen, I needed to stay in that section until 11. When customers walked by and asked questions about items in other sections, I gave them my biggest, most apologetic smile. I told them I was only assigned to help with kitchen items right now, and they'd need to find the manager for anything else. One customer pointed out that the bathroom organizers were right nearby and asked if I couldn't just help quickly. I said I'd love to help, but I had to stick to my assigned area. I offered to get the manager for them instead. By 10:45, Karen had been called over by confused customers 6 different times. Each time she gave me a suspicious look, but I just smiled and continued organizing already organized shelves. At 11, I moved to my next assigned area, home decor. Same thing. I had everything done by 11:30 and spent the next hour and a half standing around, politely redirecting customers to Karen whenever they needed help with anything outside my immediate section. During lunch, my co-worker found me in the break room. He asked what was going on out there, mentioning that Karen was running around like a crazy person trying to help everyone, and customers were complaining that no one was available. I told him I was just following my schedule exactly like she wanted. He asked if I was seriously doing the malicious compliance thing. I said I preferred to think of it as enthusiastic schedule adherence. The afternoon was even better. During my register shift from 2 to 4, I only handled transactions. When the phone rang, I let it go to the machine because answering phones wasn't specifically listed in my duties. When customers asked where items were located, I gave them the most literal responses possible. One customer asked where the picture frames were. I told them they were in the home decor section. When they asked if I could show them where that was, I explained that I was assigned to the register right now, but the home decor section was somewhere over there. By 4 o'clock, Karen looked frazzled. Her hair was messy, she had sweat stains on her shirt, and she kept shooting me irritated looks, but I was following her rules perfectly, so she couldn't say anything. My final assignment was cleaning and restocking the fitting area from 4 to 6. This was normally a 20-minute job, but I stretched it out beautifully. I organized every hanger by size and color. I vacuumed the tiny fitting room twice. I even wiped down the mirror with surgical precision. Meanwhile, I could hear chaos erupting throughout the store. The afternoon delivery had arrived, but my co-worker was alone trying to handle it while also helping customers. The phone rang constantly. Karen was practically sprinting between sections, looking more stressed by the minute. At 5:50, 10 minutes before my shift ended, Karen finally approached me. She said I didn't do much that day. I looked up from where I was meticulously arranging hangers that were already perfectly arranged. I told her I had stocked the entire kitchen section, organized all of home decor, worked the register for 2 hours, and was just finishing up a thorough cleaning of the fitting area. I had followed my schedule exactly like she asked. She said I knew what she meant. I replied that I actually didn't. She had been very clear that I should stick to my assigned tasks and not help with anything outside my scheduled duties. That's exactly what I did. She stared at me for a long moment, and I could practically see the wheels turning in her head. She couldn't write me up for following her explicit instructions, but she clearly realized that her rigid system had backfired spectacularly. The next morning, Karen pulled me aside before my shift started. She said that about yesterday, if I finished my assigned tasks early, it was fine to help out in other areas when everything got done. I asked if I should use my judgment about when and how to help. She said yes, just to use common sense. She never mentioned the schedule again. In fact, she started asking for my input on how to make the workflow more efficient. Turns out when you treat people like adults instead of robots, they actually work better. A few weeks later, I overheard her conversation with the owner. The owner mentioned that the store seemed to be running much smoother lately and asked what had changed. Karen said it was just some adjustments to their task management system, calling it more flexible scheduling. I smiled and continued stocking shelf. I've been managing my family's small Italian restaurant for about 3 years now. We inherited it from my grandfather, and it's been our lifeline since my dad got laid off from his factory job. The place isn't fancy, but we serve honest food and treat people right. Most of our customers are regulars who've been coming here for decades. The restaurant business is tough, especially for small places like ours. We're always walking a tightrope between keeping the lights on and making sure we can pay our staff. Every dollar matters, which is why what happened last Tuesday still makes my blood boil. It was a typical weeknight, maybe 7 customers scattered across our 20-table dining room. I was behind the bar going over inventory when this woman walked in. Middle-aged, blonde hair and that specific haircut that screams, "I want to speak to your manager." She was wearing expensive clothes that didn't match our casual neighborhood vibe. She sat herself at table 12 without waiting to be seated, which was our first red flag. Our server went over to greet her and offered her something to drink. The woman immediately launched into an impossible order, demanding lobster special, filet mignon, expensive wine, and fried appetizers. When our server politely explained that we don't serve lobster or filet mignon because we're an Italian restaurant, the woman got angry and told her not to make excuses. I watched this exchange from across the room and walked over to smooth things out. I introduced myself as the manager and asked if there was a problem. The woman complained that our server was being difficult and repeated her demand for the lobster special. I apologized and explained again that we don't serve lobster, suggesting our chicken parmigiana or homemade lasagna instead. She got frustrated and told me to just bring her the most expensive things we had, and to make it quick. She ended up ordering our seafood pasta, veal parmigiana, a Caesar salad, garlic bread, and 2 glasses of our priciest wine. The bill was going to be close to $80, which was unusual for a weeknight customer eating alone. While she waited for her food, she complained about everything. The music was too loud, then too quiet. The lighting was wrong. She sent back her salad because the croutons were too crunchy, then complained when we brought her softer ones that they were too soggy. About halfway through her meal, my maintenance guy started working on our old radio behind the bar. The thing had been crackling all week and he finally had time to pop it open and see what was wrong. It's an ancient transistor radio from the 70s that belonged to my grandfather. We keep it for sentimental reasons and it plays our background music. He had the back panel off and you could see all the old wires and circuits inside. Nothing dangerous, just typical radio components that any electronics repair person would recognize. Karen kept looking over at him while she ate, and I could see her getting more agitated. She finished her meal quickly after that, which should have been my second red flag. When our server brought her the check, that's when things went sideways. The woman declared she wasn't paying for what she called garbage. Our server reminded her that she had eaten the entire meal and owed $78.43. The woman insisted the service was terrible, the food was cold, and she refused to pay. She stood up like she was going to leave, but I intercepted her at the door. I told her she couldn't leave without paying her bill. She challenged me to stop her and pulled out her phone. Then she did something I'll never forget. She dialed 911 right in front of me and told the operator she needed police and bomb squad at our restaurant. She claimed there was a man with wires and electronic devices who she thought was building a bomb. My heart stopped. I told her she was insane and that he was just fixing a radio. She insisted there were wires everywhere and that this was a terrorist situation. She stayed on the line with the operator, describing our maintenance guy as suspicious and claiming she could see bomb-making materials. Within minutes, we heard sirens. Police cars, fire trucks, even what looked like a bomb squad van came screaming down our street. The authorities evacuated our entire block. Customers were running out of restaurants, businesses were shutting down, and people were genuinely terrified. During all this chaos, Karen tried to slip out the back door. Here's what she didn't know. Our back alley is a dead end, and you have to walk around the entire block to get to the street. The police had the whole area cordoned off by then. They stopped everyone leaving the evacuation zone to ask questions and get statements. When they found Karen 3 blocks away, walking quickly toward the parking garage, they brought her back to give her statement as a witness. The officer asked her to confirm she was the one who called in the bomb threat. She said yes, and thank God she did, claiming the man was clearly dangerous. The officer explained that they had examined the scene and found it was just a 1970s transistor radio. Their bomb technician confirmed it was completely harmless. That's when Karen's story started falling apart. The officer asked her why she was 3 blocks away if she was so concerned about everyone's safety. She claimed she was scared and had to get away from the danger. Then the officer asked about her unpaid restaurant bill. I spoke up and told the officer she owed us $78 and tried to leave right before she called them. The officer looked at Karen with new understanding. You could see the exact moment he realized what had really happened. The officer asked her directly if she had called in a false bomb threat to avoid paying for dinner. Karen tried to backtrack, claiming she genuinely believed there was a bomb, but then immediately contradicted herself by complaining about the food quality and insisting she shouldn't have to pay for bad food. The officer told her she was under arrest for filing a false police report and theft of services. When they put her in handcuffs, she kept screaming about how unfair it was and demanding to speak to the officer's supervisor. She tried to claim she was the victim and that we should be grateful she had saved everyone's lives. The whole incident cost the city thousands of dollars in emergency response. Our block was shut down for 3 hours. Other businesses lost money because customers couldn't get to them. My maintenance guy was so shaken up he could barely finish his shift. When Karen went to court the following month, the judge ordered her to pay restitution, not just to us, but to every business affected by the false alarm. Her $80 dine and dash ended up costing her over $15,000 in fines and restitution. She also got 6 months probation and had to do community service at a local food bank. She tried to get out of the community service by claiming she was allergic to what she called poor people food. Our little restaurant got some unexpected publicity from the whole mess. The local news covered it as a human interest story about small businesses and the crazy things they have to deal with. We actually gained some new customers who wanted to support us after hearing what happened. The old radio works perfectly now. My maintenance guy said finding all those wires exposed actually made it easier to spot the loose connection that was causing the static. We still play it every day, and every time I hear it crackle to life, I think about Karen and smile. I'm a 19-year-old college student who comes from a middle-class family where my parents taught me to take care of my belongings and respect other people's property. I work part-time at a local cafe to pay for my own clothes and personal stuff so Every purchase I make is something I've saved up for. A few months ago, I bought this gorgeous matching bikini set from a boutique store. It was light pink with delicate white lace trim, and honestly, it was one of the most expensive pieces of swimwear I'd ever bought. I saved up for weeks to get it because I loved how it looked and felt. The fabric was this really nice, soft material that felt amazing against the skin, but it was also pretty delicate and light colored. So a couple weeks ago, my friend group planned this girls' trip to Miami. We've been talking about it for months, and I was so excited. There were 6 of us going, and we'd booked this cute Airbnb near the beach. I spent weeks planning my outfits and making sure I had everything I needed. The morning we were supposed to leave, one of my friends called me in a panic. She's 21 and usually pretty organized, but she'd completely forgotten to pack a bathing suit. I've known her for about 2 years now, and she's been open about having irritable bowel syndrome. It's something she's mentioned before, and our friend group has always been understanding about it. She called me freaking out because she forgot to pack a swimsuit, and we were leaving in an hour with all the stores closed. I told her not to worry and that I had packed an extra one she could borrow. She asked if I was really sure and didn't want to impose on me. I told her it was fine since we were friends and I'd want someone to help me if I forgot something important. When we got to Miami, I gave her the pink matching set I've been saving to wear. She seemed really grateful and kept thanking me for being so understanding. She promised to take really good care of it, and I told her not to worry about it and just have fun. We had an amazing time at the beach. The weather was perfect, we took tons of photos, and everyone seemed to be enjoying themselves. My friend wore the bikini for 2 full days of beach activities. I noticed she seemed a bit uncomfortable at times and made several trips to the bathroom, but I figured that was just her condition acting up from all the traveling and different food we were eating. On our last day, she returned the bikini to me. She handed it back and thanked me again for letting her borrow it. I asked if she had a good time and she said it was the best trip ever and exactly what she needed. I didn't think much of it and just stuffed the bikini into my suitcase with all my other dirty clothes. We were rushing to catch our flight and I was exhausted from 3 days of sun and partying. When I got home, I waited a few days before doing my laundry. I had a bunch of assignments to catch up on, and laundry wasn't exactly my priority. But when I finally pulled everything out to wash, I nearly dropped the bikini bottoms. There was a very obvious brown stain right in the crotch area. It had been washed, but the stain was still visible against the light pink fabric. The material was so thin and delicate that the stain had basically set into the fibers. I felt sick to my stomach looking at it. I stared at it for a good 5 minutes, trying to figure out what to do. I knew my friend had irritable bowel syndrome, but I never expected something like this to happen. And if it did happen, I thought she'd at least tell me so we could deal with it together. I decided to text her about it, trying to be polite. I told her I hoped she had fun in Miami as I did, then asked if she knew what happened because I noticed there was a stain on the bottoms when I went to wash the bikini. She didn't respond for hours, which was unusual for her. Finally, she texted back apologizing and saying she wasn't feeling great on the last day and something must have happened. She said she tried to wash it in the sink but it didn't come out completely. I explained that I understood these things happen but the stain was really noticeable and wouldn't come out, so I asked if she could replace the bikini. She said she could pay for new bottoms since those were the ones that got stained. I told her the problem was that it was a matching set and they don't sell just the bottoms anymore. I had checked online and the whole set was discontinued, plus I couldn't really wear just the top by itself. She argued that she wasn't paying for a whole new bikini when only the bottoms got ruined because that wasn't fair. I explained that now I couldn't wear the set at all, so it was basically ruined. That's when she got defensive and said I knew she had irritable bowel syndrome when I lent it to her, and if I was worried about this kind of thing happening, I should have said no. I felt like I was being blamed for being a good friend. I told her I trusted her to take care of it, or at least tell me if something happened so we could handle it together, and I wouldn't have found out if I hadn't done my laundry. She got even more defensive and said it wasn't like she did it on purpose, that she had a medical condition, and I was being really inconsiderate. She called it just a bathing suit. I explained it wasn't just a bathing suit to me because I had saved up for weeks to buy it, and now it was ruined, so I thought it was fair to ask her to replace what she damaged. She stuck to her position and said she already offered to pay for bottoms, telling me to take it or leave it. That's when I realized this conversation wasn't going anywhere. I talked to some of our other friends about it, hoping they'd help me figure out a fair solution. The reactions were mixed. Two of our friends thought I was being too harsh. One said she didn't do it on purpose and I knew she had medical issues. Another said if I didn't want to risk something happening, I shouldn't have lent it to her in the first place. But the other two friends supported me. One said, if you borrow something and damage it, you replace it because that's basic courtesy. The other agreed and said she should have told me immediately when it happened instead of trying to hide it. The whole situation has created this weird tension in our group. My friend who borrowed the bikini has been pretty cold to me ever since, and she's been telling people that I'm being unreasonable and making a big deal out of nothing. But here's the thing. It's not really about the money or even the bikini itself. It's about the principle. If you borrow something from a friend and damage it, especially in such a gross way, the right thing to do is replace it without arguing. And definitely don't blame the person who was kind enough to help you out in the first place. What really bothers me is that she tried to hide it from me. If she had just been honest and said something happened, we could have dealt with it together. Instead, I had to discover it on my own days later, which made the whole thing feel so much worse. Yesterday, I decided I'd had enough of the drama. I found the exact same bikini set on a resale website for twice what I originally paid, but it was the only one I could find. I bought it with my own money and then sent my friend the receipt. I texted her saying that since she refused to replace what she damaged, I had to buy a replacement myself. I sent her the receipt showing what it cost me to fix her mistake and told her I thought our friendship deserved better than this. She read the message but never responded. A few hours later, one of our mutual friends called me. She told me that my friend was really upset that I was still pushing this bikini thing and said I was being petty. Apparently, she might not want to hang out with the group anymore if I kept making it a big deal. I told our mutual friend that I wasn't the one making it a big deal. I had asked for a simple replacement and got blamed for trying to help a friend. I said if she wanted to end friendships over taking responsibility for her actions, that said more about her than it did about me. The friend group is still pretty divided, but honestly, I'm okay with that. I live in this small apartment building for about 3 years now. It's nothing fancy, just a quiet place where most of us keep to ourselves. The building has maybe 12 units and honestly, it's been pretty peaceful. We all nod politely when we pass in the hallways, help each other with doors when our hands are full, that sort of thing. I work remotely, so having a quiet place to live is really important to me. Most of my neighbors are great. There's an elderly couple downstairs who always smiles and waves, a single mom with 2 kids who are actually pretty well behaved, and a few other working professionals like myself. We respect each other's space and privacy. But then there's Unit 4B. These guys moved in about 8 months ago. There are 3 of them, all in their early 20s, and they act like they're still in college. At first it was just little things. Music playing a bit too loud on weeknight evenings, doors slamming at weird hours, the occasional smell of cigarette smoke drifting through the building. Then it got worse. They started having friends over constantly. Not just 1 or 2 people, but groups of 5 or 6 guys who would hang out on the back stairs smoking and being loud until 2 or 3 in the morning. They'd argue with each other, sometimes shouting matches that would wake up half the building. The smoke from their cigarettes would drift into other units through the ventilation system. I tried to be understanding. We're all young ones, right? I figured they'd settle down eventually or maybe get complaints from other tenants and tone it down. I didn't want to be the uptight neighbor who calls the landlord over every little thing, so I just put in earplugs, used a fan for white noise, and dealt with it. That was my mistake. Last month I decided to treat myself to something I've been wanting for ages. I'm really into photography as a hobby, and I've been saving up for this professional camera lens that cost about $300. It wasn't cheap for me, but I've been working extra hours and finally had the money set aside. I ordered it online and had it shipped to my apartment like I always do. I've never had any problems with packages before. Our building is pretty secure, and most deliveries just get left by our front doors or in the main lobby if it's something valuable. The delivery drivers know the building well, and we've never had any theft issues. The tracking said my package would arrive on a Tuesday afternoon. I was working from home that day, so I kept checking my phone for the delivery notification. Around 2:30 p.m., I got the text that it had been delivered, along with a photo of where it was dropped off. The photo showed my package sitting right next to the back door of Unit 4B. Not by my door, not in the lobby, but right at their back entrance where they always hung out smoking. I knew this couldn't be good. I immediately went downstairs to check. It was maybe 30 minutes after the delivery time, so I figured there was still a chance it would be there. But of course, it wasn't. I stood there for a moment, looking at the empty spot where my package should have been. Part of me wanted to believe maybe the delivery guy had made an honest mistake and put it somewhere else. But deep down, I knew exactly what had happened. I took a deep breath and knocked on their door. One of them answered. He was probably about 22, wearing a wrinkled t-shirt and looking like he'd just woken up even though it was mid-afternoon. I politely apologized for bothering him and explained that I had a package delivered that day. I told him it looked like it might have been dropped off near their back door by mistake and asked if he had happened to see it. He said he hadn't seen anything, trying to look casual, but I could tell he was nervous. Then one of his roommates called out from inside the apartment, asking what I was asking about. The guy at the door told his roommate it was about some package. When the roommate asked what kind of package, the guy at the door blurted out exactly what it was before I could even respond. He said it was some camera lens thing. The moment he said it, I knew for sure they had stolen my package. There was no way he would know what was in it unless he'd opened it himself. But I kept my cool. I thanked him and said that if he happened to see anything, could he let me know because it was pretty important. He agreed and said no problem. I walked back to my apartment, but I was furious. $300 might not seem like a lot to some people, but it was a big purchase for me. I'd worked hard for that money, and these entitled jerks thought they could just take my stuff because it was convenient for them. I called the police right away. I explained the situation and showed them the delivery photo. The officer who took my call was really understanding. He told me they see this kind of thing more often than I'd think and asked if I had any proof they took it. I explained that when I asked about it, one of them knew exactly what was in the package without me telling him. The officer said that was pretty suspicious and that they'd go have a talk with them. About an hour later, the police showed up at Unit 4B. I could hear them talking through the walls, though I couldn't make out exactly what was being said. There was some back and forth, some raised voices, and then about 20 minutes later, there was a knock at my door. It was the officer holding my package. He told me they had found it in their apartment. He said the tenants said they brought it inside for safekeeping and forgot to tell me. I sarcastically agreed that I was sure that's exactly what happened. The officer asked if I wanted to press charges. He explained that they had them on theft, and given the value, it wasn't just a slap on the wrist. I thought about it for a moment. Part of me wanted to see them face what they deserved for stealing from me. But I also knew that pressing charges would mean court dates, paperwork, and a lot of hassle for what would probably just end up being a fine and maybe some community service. I told the officer that I thought I had a better idea. Instead of pressing charges, I decided to contact our landlord. He's a pretty reasonable guy who lives about 20 minutes away and manages several small buildings like ours. I called him that evening and explained everything that had happened. Not just the package theft, but all the noise complaints, the smoking, the constant parties, everything. The landlord apologized that this had happened to me. He said he'd actually been getting some other complaints about that unit too, but he didn't realize it was this bad. I explained that I had tried to be patient and not bother him with every little thing, but stealing packages crossed a line. He completely agreed and said he'd look into it. He mentioned he might have grounds for eviction if they were violating multiple lease terms. He asked me to document everything I could remember about their behavior, including dates and times when possible. He also said he'd be reaching out to other tenants to see if anyone else had similar experiences. Over the next few days, I started paying more attention to what was going on with Unit 4B. I noticed they were being a lot quieter than usual, no more late night parties, no more loud arguments. I think having the police show up at their door really spooked them, but it was too late for them to change their ways now. The landlord called me back 3 days later with an update. He told me it was interesting because he had more grounds for eviction than he thought. Besides the noise complaints and the theft incident, they'd been violating their lease in several other ways. He explained they'd been smoking inside the unit, which was strictly prohibited, and they'd been having more people living there than what was allowed under the lease terms. I asked what would happen now. He said he was starting the eviction process and that in this state, with the violations they'd racked up, he could move pretty quickly. I felt a sense of satisfaction hearing that. These guys thought they could just do whatever they wanted with no results, but actions have effects. Just over 24 hours later, I was working at my desk when I heard a lot of commotion outside. When I looked out my window, I saw a moving truck parked outside and the guys from 4B loading boxes and furniture. They were moving out voluntarily. I guess once they realized the landlord was serious about eviction, they decided to cut their losses and leave on their own terms, rather than have an eviction on their record. Smart move, honestly, but it was still incredibly satisfying to watch them pack up their stuff and leave. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.